You're standing at a crossroads right now, whether you realize it or not. 5 years from today, you'll arrive at a destination. The question isn't if you'll get there, you will. Time doesn't stop. The question is, will you recognize yourself when you arrive? Will you be proud of who's staring back at you in the mirror? Or will you feel that hollow ache of regret, knowing you had the map but never took the journey? Most people sleepwalk through their lives. They hit the snooze button, stumble out of bed at the last possible moment, rush through their mornings in a fog of reactive chaos, and wonder why their lives feel out of control. They make wishes instead of decisions. They talk about dreams instead of building them. And 5 years later, they're shocked to discover they're in the exact same place, only older, more tired, and carrying heavier regrets. There's a man I want you to know about. His name was Sosthane Beaumont, and until he turned 38, he was invisible, not to others, to himself. He worked as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company outside of Montreal, the same position he'd held for 14 years. Good man, reliable, showed up on time, did his job, went home, nothing remarkable, nothing terrible, just existing in that gray zone where most people spend their entire lives. Sosthane's father passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Massive heart attack, no warning, gone at 63. At the funeral, Sosthane did what sons do. He held his mother, greeted relatives he hadn't seen in years, and pretended to be stronger than he felt. But the real devastation came 2 weeks later, when he was cleaning out his father's small office in the basement. Tucked inside an old leather journal, he found something that changed everything. Pages and pages of notes, all written in his father's precise handwriting. Dreams, plans, business ideas, book outlines, inventions sketched in careful detail, and every single entry was time-stamped 5 a.m., 5:15 a.m., 5:30 a.m. His father had been waking up early for decades, capturing ideas in the quiet hours before the world demanded his attention. But here's what broke Sosthane. Not one of these ideas had ever left the page. Not one. His father had spent 30 years waking early, thinking deeply, planning brilliantly, and then filing it all away in a basement drawer. The job at the factory had consumed his days. Exhaustion had consumed his evenings. And all those early morning revelations had died with him, nothing more than ink on forgotten pages. Sosthane sat on the concrete floor of that basement, journal in his hands, and saw his own future staring back at him. He thought about his own notebook at home, filled with ideas he'd been collecting for years. The business he wanted to start, the skills he meant to learn, the person he intended to become, someday, when things settled down. When the timing was right, when he had more energy, more money, more certainty. That night, Sosthane couldn't sleep, not because of grief, though that was there, but because he'd done the mathematics and the numbers were terrifying. He was 38. His father died at 63. That meant, if genetics had anything to say about it, Sosthane had 25 years left, 25 trips around the sun. But it wasn't really 25 years of opportunity. Subtract the time already committed to work, to sleep, to the 1,000 little obligations that fill a life. What remained? Maybe 5 years of actual discretionary time. 5 years of mornings and evenings and weekends where he could build something different. 5 years to become someone new, or 5 years to cement exactly who he already was. Your life operates on a principle that's both beautiful and brutal. Compound interest. You've heard this term applied to money, but it applies to everything. Every action you take, every habit you build, every morning you own or surrender, it all compounds. Do something small and positive today, repeat it tomorrow and the day after, and a year from now you'll be astonished at the distance you've covered. But the reverse is equally true. Make excuses today, hit snooze tomorrow, choose comfort over growth, and a year from now you'll be exactly where you are right now, only with one less year to change course. Here's what nobody wants to tell you, because it's uncomfortable and it eliminates excuses. Your current daily routine is a perfect prediction machine. Show me how you spend your mornings, and I'll show you your future with stunning accuracy. If you wake up rushed, reactive, already behind before your feet hit the floor, then 5 years from now you'll still be rushed, still reactive, still behind. Your income will be roughly the same. Your relationships will follow the same patterns. Your body will reflect the same neglect or care you're giving it right now. The life you have today is the sum total of your choices yesterday. And the life you'll have 5 years from now is being constructed by the choices you're making today. This very morning, this very hour. Sosthane understood this sitting on that basement floor, surrounded by his father's abandoned dreams. He made a decision that night, not a wish, not a hope, but a concrete decision with consequences attached. He set his alarm for 4:45 a.m., not because he was a morning person, he wasn't, not because it would be easy, it wouldn't be, but because he recognized that if he didn't change his mornings, nothing else would change either. The first week was misery. His body rebelled. His mind invented 1,000 reasons why this was unnecessary, extreme, unsustainable. But he kept the journal his father left him on his nightstand, and every time he wanted to quit, he'd flip through those pages of unrealized potential. That journal became his mirror, showing him not who his father was, but who Sosthane was becoming if he didn't choose differently. 3 months into his new routine, something shifted. The warehouse job hadn't changed, the bills hadn't disappeared, the challenges were all still there, but Sosthane had changed. In those early morning hours, before anyone needed anything from him, before emails and phone calls and interruptions, he'd found something he didn't know existed, himself. The real version, not the tired, reactive, stretch-thin version that stumbled through his days. He started the business he'd been planning for 6 years, not perfectly, not with some dramatic leap, just one early morning at a time, building while the world slept. Where is Sosthane now? We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what he understood. 5 years is simultaneously forever and no time at all. It's long enough to completely transform your life, and short enough that you can't afford to waste another day. There's a pattern written into the fabric of human achievement that most people never see. It's hidden in plain sight, operating quietly beneath the surface of every success story you've ever admired. The pattern is this: extraordinary lives are built in ordinary mornings, not in grand gestures, not in perfect conditions, not when inspiration strikes like lightning, but in the dark, quiet hours when nobody's watching, nobody's cheering, and nobody would blame you for staying in bed. Your brain is plastic. That's not metaphor, it's neuroscience. Every morning when you wake, your brain is in a unique state. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and willpower, is fresh, undepleted. The world hasn't made its demands yet. Your phone hasn't flooded you with other people's agendas. This window, roughly the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking, is when you have maximum control over your trajectory. What you do with this window doesn't just affect your day. It rewires your identity. Most people surrender this sacred time to the tyranny of urgency. They wake up late, already stressed, checking notifications, before their eyes fully open. They're responding to the world before they've created anything in it. They're playing defense before the game even starts. And here's what that does over time. It trains your nervous system to be reactive. Reactive people don't build empires. They don't transform industries. They don't become the highest version of themselves. They survive, they cope, they manage, but they don't create. The difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't talent. It's not luck, connections, or capital. It's the ritual you perform when no one's looking. It's whether you own your morning or your morning owns you. Let me tell you about Amelia Frost. 29 years old, single mother of 2 boys, ages 7 and 4. Their father wasn't in the picture, hadn't been since the youngest was born. Amelia worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed. She cleaned offices from 6 p.m. to midnight. She worked the morning shift at a diner from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. And she did weekend inventory at a retail store. Exhausted doesn't begin to cover it. She was running on fumes, duct tape, and the fierce love only a mother understands. Her life was a treadmill spinning faster every year, going nowhere. At night, after she finally got her boys to sleep, she'd collapse into bed knowing she'd wake up in 5 hours to do it all again. The weight of it was crushing her. Not physically, though that too, but mentally. She could see her future with painful clarity. 10 more years of this grind, watching opportunities pass her by, watching her sons grow up with a mother too tired to really be present, watching herself age into bitterness and regret. One November evening, while cleaning an office building, she found herself in the tech wing of a software company. The desks were covered with equipment she didn't recognize, screens displaying code she couldn't read. But on a whiteboard, someone had written something that stopped her cold. The only difference between who you are and who you want to be is what you do. Simple, obvious, and yet it detonated something inside her. Amelia went home that night and did something she hadn't done in years. She made a plan, not a wish. Not a fantasy, a plan with specific steps and painful honesty. She researched career paths that could actually change her financial reality. Software development kept appearing. The salaries were real. The demand was high. Remote work was common. But there was a problem. She had no degree, no experience, no time, and no money for expensive boot camps. What she did have was 5 hours between when her boys fell asleep and when she had to leave for her night shift. But she was already destroyed by then, too exhausted to focus. Then she looked at her schedule differently. She worked at the diner until 2 p.m. She had to pick up her boys from school at 3:15 p.m. But what if she slept when they slept? From 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., then woke up and studied before her morning shift. That's exactly what she did. 5 mornings a week, her alarm went off at 1 a.m. She'd make coffee in the dark, grab her laptop, and sit in her car in the parking lot of a closed grocery store where the Wi-Fi signal reached. From 1:30 a.m. to 5:30 a.m., while the world slept, Amelia Frost taught herself to code. The first 3 months were torture. Her body fought the schedule. The material was harder than anything she'd attempted. There were mornings when she sat in that car and cried from frustration, from exhaustion, from the sheer weight of trying to change a life that felt set in concrete. But she kept showing up, not because she was special or talented or blessed with superhuman discipline, because she'd done the calculation and she knew what 5 more years of her current life would cost her. That cost was unacceptable. Here's what happened in those early morning hours that nobody tells you about. Amelia didn't just learn programming, she learned herself. In the silence and solitude, she discovered capabilities she'd buried under years of survival mode. She found focus she didn't know existed. She developed problem-solving skills that had nothing to do with code and everything to do with resilience. When you're alone at 3 a.m., working on something that matters while everyone else sleeps, you're not just building a skill. You're forging an identity. 18 months later, Amelia landed a junior developer position at a startup. Remote work, $67,000 a year. More than she'd made from all 3 jobs combined. She quit the diner, the cleaning company, and the retail store in the same week. But here's the part that matters. The money was life-changing, yes. But what truly transformed was Amelia herself. That woman who used to collapse into bed defeated every night, gone. Replaced by someone who'd proven to herself that she could do impossible things. Someone who'd sat in a dark parking lot hundreds of mornings and chosen growth over comfort. Someone who'd looked at an insurmountable obstacle and climbed it anyway. Your competition isn't resting. While you're convincing yourself you need more sleep, someone else is awake, building, learning, improving. While you're scrolling through social media in bed, someone with your same dream and half your advantages is putting in the work that separates wanting from having. The marketplace doesn't care about your intentions, it rewards execution. And execution happens in the hours you thought you couldn't afford to sacrifice. This is the uncomfortable truth about transformation. It requires you to become someone you've never been. You can't achieve unprecedented results with your current habits. You can't build a different life with the same daily routine. Something has to change, and that something is you. Not tomorrow, not next week when things settle down. Now, today, this morning. Sosthene found this out when he started waking at 4:45 a.m. Amelia discovered it in a parking lot at 1:30 a.m. The specific hour doesn't matter. What matters is the decision to own time instead of being owned by it. What matters is the willingness to be uncomfortable now so you can be extraordinary later. 5 years will pass, regardless. The question that should terrify and motivate you in equal measure is this. When those 5 years are gone, will you have become someone new, or will you simply be 5 years older with the same excuses? There's a specific kind of silence that exists before dawn. It's different from the quiet of evening or the hush of night. This silence has weight, texture, possibility. It's the sound of potential waiting to be shaped. In this silence, something remarkable happens. You meet the truest version of yourself, unfiltered by the demands of others, uninfluenced by the noise of the world. This is where transformation begins. Not in motivation, not in inspiration, but in the deliberate construction of a life that didn't exist yesterday. Most people confuse activity with progress. They fill their early mornings with busy work, scrolling, reacting, consuming. They mistake motion for momentum. But there's a fundamental difference between being awake early and being awake with purpose. Waking at 5 doesn't guarantee success. Waking at 5 and knowing exactly what you're building, that changes everything. The hour itself holds no magic. It's what you architect into that hour that compounds into an unrecognizable life 5 years forward. Every truly successful person I've studied, every individual who's built something meaningful from nothing, has one commonality. They guard their mornings like sacred ground. Not because they're disciplined. Discipline is what you need when you don't have clarity. They protect their mornings because they've discovered what happens when you consistently give your best energy to your biggest opportunities instead of other people's emergencies. Let me introduce you to Warwick Holloway, 45 years old, when his third business collapsed. Not struggled, collapsed. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, divorce. The complete dismantling of everything he'd built over 2 decades. His partners blamed him. His ex-wife blamed him. Honestly, he blamed himself. He'd worked 18-hour days for years, grinding, hustling, pushing, and somehow ended up with less than nothing. Debt that would take a decade to clear. A reputation in tatters. 2 teenage daughters who barely recognized him because he'd been absent, chasing success that never materialized. Most men would have been destroyed. Warwick nearly was. He spent 6 months in his brother's basement, spiraling into depression, replaying every failed decision, every missed signal, every arrogant assumption that led to his downfall. He applied for regular jobs and got rejected, overqualified on paper, too risky in reality. Nobody wants to hire a failed entrepreneur who once ran a 7-figure company. They see liability, not potential. Rock bottom has a particular clarity to it. When you've lost everything external, you're forced to look at what's internal. Warwick started waking at 5 a.m., not because he'd read some productivity book or heard motivational advice. He woke early because he couldn't sleep, haunted by failure and fear. But instead of lying in bed torturing himself, he started going to a 24-hour coffee shop 3 blocks away. He'd sit in the corner with a notebook, and he'd think. Not plan, not strategize. Just think, deep, uncomfortable, honest thinking about how he'd arrived at 45 with nothing to show but cautionary tales. He examined every business he'd built, every decision he'd made. He wasn't trying to figure out what went wrong, he knew what went wrong. He was trying to understand why. Why had he chosen speed over sustainability? Why had he prioritized growth over profit? Why had he listened to mentors who'd never built what he was trying to build? Why had he worked so hard on the wrong things? 6 weeks into this routine, something emerged from the silence. A pattern. In every failed venture, Warwick had been asking the wrong questions. He'd asked, how can I grow faster? When he should have asked, what actually creates value? He'd asked, how do I get more customers? When he should have asked, why would someone pay me to solve this problem? He'd asked, how do I compete? When he should have asked, how do I make competition irrelevant? This wasn't about business strategy. This was about fundamental thinking. In those early morning hours, with no distractions and no audience, Warwick rebuilt his entire approach to problem solving. He filled 17 notebooks over 8 months. Most of it was garbage, circular thoughts, half-formed ideas, angry rants at himself and the universe. But buried in all that noise were insights he'd never accessed while busy being busy. Insights that only emerge when you give your mind space to wander, connect, and create without the pressure of immediate application. Month 9. He started sketching a business model. Not another version of what he'd done before. Something completely different, built on the principles he'd excavated from failure. Where his previous ventures tried to be everything to everyone, this would be hyper-specific. Where he'd previously chased volume, this would pursue value. Where he'd built complex systems, this would embrace elegant simplicity. He didn't have capital, didn't have a team, didn't have anything except those notebooks and the clarity that came from months of early morning thinking. He started talking to people, not selling, just listening. Understanding their problems at a level he'd never bothered with before. He wasn't pitching solutions, he was absorbing pain points. And because he did this at coffee shops at 5:30 a.m., he met a specific type of person, others, who were awake early, working on something that mattered. These weren't his old network of entrepreneurs and hustlers. These were engineers, designers, operations people who valued substance over flash. Within 14 months of sleeping on his brother's basement couch, Warwick had built a profitable business. Nothing flashy, no venture capital, no press releases. Just a solution to a specific problem, sold to people who desperately needed it, delivered by a small team of people who respected the mission. By month 24, they were doing $80,000 a month in revenue. By year 4, They crossed 8 figures annually. Year 6, a private equity firm offered $40 million for acquisition. Warwick sold. But here's what matters. The money didn't change him because he'd already changed. That transformation happened in those early morning hours when he stopped doing and started thinking, when he stopped performing and started examining, when he traded busyness for depth. The business that sold for 8 figures wasn't the goal, it was the byproduct of a man who'd used his mornings to reconstruct his mind. This is what separates those who transform from those who simply age. Intentional solitude applied to significant questions. Your mornings shouldn't be about checking boxes or grinding through tasks. They should be about thinking at a level your busy days will never allow, about connecting dots that distraction keeps separated, about asking questions that comfort keeps buried. The crowd will never understand this. They'll see your early wake time and call it extreme. They'll watch you choose solitude over socializing and call it antisocial. They'll observe your commitment to morning rituals and call it obsessive. Let them. The crowd isn't building what you're building. The crowd isn't going where you're going. The crowd will be in the exact same place 5 years from now, wondering why nothing changed, never realizing they gave away their most powerful hours to sleep, comfort, and distraction. What you do between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. while the world sleeps is invisible. There's no applause, no recognition, no immediate reward. You're building in the dark, and darkness reveals who's serious. Anyone can work hard when people are watching. Anyone can push when there's an audience. But who you become when nobody's looking, when nobody would know if you quit, when it's just you and your commitment that determines everything. Sosthene used his mornings to build the business that replaced his warehouse job. Amelia used her mornings to acquire the skills that tripled her income. Warwick used his mornings to develop the thinking that created his comeback. Different people, different circumstances, different goals, but identical principle. They treated their early hours not as time to get through, but as space to grow into. They understood that 5 years from now, they'd either be grateful they started or regretful they waited. Your mornings are testing you, every single one. The alarm goes off, and that moment is a referendum on who you're becoming. Hit snooze, and you voted for the same life. Get up, with purpose, and you voted for transformation. Do this once, it means nothing. Do this for 5 years, and you're unrecognizable. Right now, at this precise moment, you're standing at an intersection, not metaphorically, literally. Every second that passes is carrying you toward one of 2 futures, and the distance between them is so vast they might as well be different universes. In one future, 5 years from today, you've become someone you're proud of. You've built something real. You've developed capabilities that didn't exist in you before. You look back at this moment and feel gratitude that you chose differently. In the other future, you're older, more tired, and carrying a heavier load of regret because you knew what needed to change and you chose comfort instead. The brutal truth about potential is that it has an expiration date, not someday in the distant future, but right now, today, this morning. Every day you delay becoming who you're capable of being, that person becomes a little harder to reach. Not impossible, but harder. Your habits calcify. Your excuses become more sophisticated. Your comfort zone becomes a prison you've decorated so nicely you forget you're trapped. You already know what you need to do. Deep down, beneath the rationalizations and negotiations with yourself, you know which relationships are draining you, you know which habits are destroying your future. You know what skills you need to develop, you know what business you should start, you know what conversations you need to have, you know what you need to stop tolerating in yourself and others. The knowledge is there. What's missing isn't information. What's missing is the willingness to act on what you already know. Sosthene Beaumont knew he needed to start that business for 6 years before he actually did. 6 years of perfect knowledge and 0 action. It took finding his father's journal of unrealized dreams to create enough pain that staying the same became more uncomfortable than changing. He's 51 now. That business he started in his warehouse supervisor days, it's grown into a logistics consulting firm with 18 employees and clients across North America. But he'll tell you something interesting. The business success isn't what transformed his life. It was who he had to become to build it. The man who wakes at 4:45 a.m. now isn't doing it out of discipline or obligation. He's doing it because he's addicted to the person he becomes in those quiet hours. That version of himself, focused, clear, purposeful, is who he actually is. The rushed, reactive version that used to stumble through his days was an imposter created by poor choices. Amelia Frost is 35 now. She's a senior developer making $140,000 a year, working remotely, present for her sons in ways she never imagined possible. But the money isn't what changed her life. It's the proof. Proof that she's capable of doing hard things. Proof that her circumstances don't define her capabilities. Proof that when she commits to something, really commits, there's no obstacle too large. Her sons watch her work some mornings now, and they're learning something no school can teach. That their mother is someone who transforms impossibilities into achievements through consistency and courage. Warwick Holloway sold that business for $40 million, yes. But he'll tell you the real wealth wasn't the exit. It was discovering that his previous failures weren't about market conditions or bad luck or the wrong partners. They were about him specifically, about his refusal to think deeply about what he was building and why. Those early morning hours in that coffee shop, filling notebooks with uncomfortable questions, that's where the transformation happened. The business was just evidence. He's 58 now, investing in and mentoring entrepreneurs, and the advice he gives most often isn't about tactics or strategies. It's this: protect your mornings like your life depends on it, because it does. 3 different people, 3 different starting points. One identical principle: they stopped negotiating with themselves about when they'd start living intentionally. They picked a date, not someday, not eventually, but a specific date, and on that date, they became different people. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but irreversibly. You can do the same thing. Not metaphorically. Actually, tonight, before you sleep, you can make a decision that changes the trajectory of everything that follows. You can set an alarm for 5 a.m. You can decide what you'll do in that first hour. You can commit to doing it regardless of how you feel, regardless of what's convenient, regardless of who understands or supports you. And tomorrow morning, when that alarm goes off, you can take the single most important action of your life. You can get up. That moment, that specific moment when the alarm sounds and you're warm and comfortable and every part of you wants to stay where you are, that moment is the hinge your entire future swings on. Get up, and you've declared war on mediocrity. Stay down, and you voted for another year exactly like the last one. It's that simple and that significant. The 5-year test is ruthlessly honest. Look at where you were 5 years ago. Look at what you thought would change. Look at what actually changed. If you're disappointed by that comparison, you have no one to blame and no time to waste. The next 5 years are already in motion. They're being constructed by what you do today, tomorrow, this week, this month. You can't reclaim the last 5 years, but you can refuse to waste the next 5. Here's what will happen if you commit to owning your mornings. The first week will be miserable. Your body will rebel. Your mind will offer compelling reasons to quit. You'll question whether it's worth it. Push through. Week 2 gets slightly easier. Week 3, you'll notice small changes, more energy, clearer thinking, a sense of control you haven't felt in years. Month 2, people will start noticing something different about you. Month 6, you'll look back and barely recognize who you were. Year 2, your entire life will be unrecognizable. Year 5, you'll understand that the person who started this journey and the person you've become are separated by a chasm so wide that going back isn't even conceivable. This isn't theory. This isn't motivational fluff. This is the documented pattern of every person who's ever transformed their life from ordinary to extraordinary. They all found a way to own their mornings. They all chose discomfort over comfort. They all started before they felt ready. They all did it when no one was watching. And they all arrived at a destination that justified every difficult morning. The world won't wait for you to feel ready. Markets don't pause because you need more time. Opportunities don't hold themselves open until you've gathered enough courage. Life moves forward with or without your participation, and 5 years will evaporate whether you use them or waste them. The difference between those who succeed and those who simply survive is the understanding that readiness is a myth perpetuated by fear. You're going to arrive somewhere 5 years from today. That's guaranteed. The only question is whether you'll arrive with regret or with results. Whether you'll arrive wondering what could have been or celebrating what you built. Whether you'll arrive as a warning or as an example. The decision is yours, but the deadline is now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Tonight, before you sleep, decide. Tomorrow morning, when the alarm sounds, prove it. 5 years from today, thank yourself for having the courage to begin.